My name is Matt, and I review retro games. Like most of you, I'm a huge fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd, and he's one of my biggest influences. Unlike a number of his followers, I enjoy most of the turds he rips apart, and that is why I now don the moniker of the LJN Defender! LJN, along with Ocean, is known for holding a firm grip on the licensed property market, distributing countless games based on beloved 80s and 90s franchises. Last time, I put up a defense for Back to the Future, but I'm gonna hold off on tackling the sequel for now, and instead, move on to another staple of 80s cinema, The Karate Kid. The first installment in the Ralph Macchio starring series was released in 1984, and the NES version, as of Back to the Future, came out much later in 1987, a year after The Karate Kid Part 2 was released. Owing to this, the 8-bit iteration focuses more on the events of the sequel than the original. The Karate Kid was one of the first AVGN episodes, and the very first LJN title featured on the show, setting a precedent for all of the rage to follow. In a fitting metaphor for his feelings on it, the nerd flushed the Karate Kid down the toilet. Personally, though I play Back to the Future more, I think the Karate Kid is of a higher quality and a much better developed game. Speaking of quality, remember how I teased in the Back to the Future episode about the shocking identity of some of the developers of these popularly held atrocities? Brace yourselves for this. The Karate Kid was developed by Atlas. Yes, the Atlas of Persona fame. Atlas indeed has 8-bit origins, responsible for underrated NES gems, Widget, Rocking Cats, and one of my childhood favorites, Wacky Races. This fact alone speaks volumes on behalf of LJN. If you're going to accuse the company of putting out wretched licensed cash-ins, know that you must also put Atlas in the same boat. As I mentioned before, the levels of the Karate Kid NES mostly involve set pieces from the sequel. The tournament conclusion of the first film is the only element present and is the introductory stage. The playstyle of this segment sort of takes after the Data East arcade hit Karate Champ. The tournament section is a breeze to advance past. There's no leg sweeping here. Just kick and kick some more until victory is achieved, no strategy required. James had very little to say about this section, and neither do I. It doesn't get more basic than this. After this is where the real action begins. Level 2, Daniel-san in Okinawa. From here on out, the tournament setting switches to a side-scrolling style so popular in the bygone days of the NES. Take the black box classic Kung Fu and mix in platforms and weather hazards. The resulting mashup would pretty much be the remainder of the Karate Kid. The side-scrolling overall is standard and not really broken in any way. I will agree with the nerd that up to jump can be quite aggravating and cause me to mistime a leap and fall to my death a number of times. The other factor that can provide ample frustration is the overly energetic enemies. They're just constantly up in your grill and will do just about anything to ensure Daniel-san's demise, even sacrifice themselves. This, even more so than the Typhoon in Level 3, is the biggest hurdle in making progress, so this is something that James and I are in total agreement on. I think I remember hearing on a commentary or somewhere that in the early days of the AVGN, James used to purposefully run into foes in order to emphasize the difficulty. I, of course, am trying to depict the game as it naturally is, and James really didn't have to play it up at all. The Karate Kid is naturally brutally difficult due to these guys, the worst offender being the spear pushers in the final area. I hate those bastards! Colliding with the assailants will send LaRusso flying back, potentially into one of the Death Pit abysses. With jumping reminiscent of a more polished Action 52, it can be hard enough to brave the Gale Force winds. Trying to do so while fending off the rushes of mental maniacs really ramps up the challenge. And yes, I dropped a few expletives, which I'll refrain from mentioning, during my capture session, but I never stopped having fun during the hour and a half that I spent attempting to beat it. I find the Karate Kid to be far less stress-inducing than Back to the Future, especially since checkpoints are accessed across the stages, and life meter refills appear in the form of the supporting cast. Of course, this doesn't make completion a simple task, but it eases the burden a little. Getting back to the controls, minus up to jump, I think they're well suited to the speedy nature of this very early NES licensed tie-in, much like they were for the previously mentioned IREM title, and nobody complained about them there. A punches, B kicks, and the signature crane kick from the film, as well as the drum punch, provide an extra powerful attack boost. See those C and D icons that constantly pop up after Daniel-san bashes a baddie? Those manage the number of techniques that the titular teenager has in his arsenal at any given time. They have the bonus benefit of increasing the life meter a little every time they're collected. I never quite figured out how to do the drummer crane during my playthrough. I could perform them, but I never knew what the mechanics were behind them. I later found out after reading the manual on Nintendo Age that these are simply accomplished by pressing either button without a direction. A for the drum, and B for the crane. Both techniques are faithfully depicted in translation from the big screen to an 8-bit cartridge. I guess I shouldn't be surprised about this, since Atlas was behind this. It goes to show that Atlas was grade A good since their formation. The only thing left to address are the bonus rounds. The nerd showed one, but there are actually 3 in total. Besides the swinging hammer, there's ice block break and chopsticks fly catch. These minigames involve breaking ice blocks and catching flies with a pair of chopsticks. All of these are easy to learn, but tough to master. James made them out to look near impossible, but I was actually able to ace both the swinging hammer and the ice block break. Don't believe me? Check out the footage! Unlike Back to the Future, these are not required for passage to the next area. They're completely optional! The only reward received for completing the bonus stages satisfactorily are extra crane and drum power-ups. Back to the Future could have learned a thing or two from the Karate Kid. In summation, the Karate Kid is average in comparison to Contra, Metroid, and its other peers of the time, but is actually one of the better LJN titles. The music is mostly unmemorable, but that's a plus in my book, especially after the chaotic dissonance of the Back to the Future soundtrack. It fits the Asian martial arts theme, but is mostly just there in the background. That in itself puts it leagues above its younger sibling. Add in a mostly tight control scheme, overall faithfulness to the source material, and skippable bonus stages, as well as the inclusion of multiplayer modes, and voila! A title perfectly fit for inclusion in the upper portion of the LJN echelon. Miles above Bill and Ted and Beetlejuice, but not up to the standards set by Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street. This one is definitely worth giving a second look to. And if you still think it's trash after re-examination, that's perfectly fine. At the least, you have to admit it's better than Back to the Future. There's nothing on par with the Hell at Lou's Cafe here. Well, that about does it. At this, the end of my first full year on YouTube, I want to thank all of you, old viewers and new, for all the support you've shown me. you'll be happy to know that the response to the LJN Defender has been mostly positive. I was bracing myself for a huge backlash and a troll infestation, but I never really got any. Not everyone seems to share my feelings on these titles, but most are glad to see someone else expressing another side on the topic of the pulverized publisher. The LJN Defender, as well as Cygnus Destroyer's retro reviews, will be back in January, sometime after the holidays. I've got plenty of material to keep this show going for a long time to come. I mean, think about it. James has torn many a Rainbow and Blazing cartridge a new one over the years, and he's only covered a fraction of them. I'm just getting started on the ones that have been featured on the AVGN, so expect many more positive spins on these debatably terrible titles, and reviews on genuinely good ones in 2014. As always, you can reach me on Twitter at Cygnus Destroyer or on Facebook.com/Cygnus Destroyer. I'm always open for chatting or receiving suggestions for either series. Thanks again, and I hope you all have a happy holiday and new year with plenty of retro gaming goodness. Take care, everyone.